Yo, what's up guys? Now I'm no flat earther, but after you see today's build, it might change our minds. Today we'll be following a chill dude that discovered the earth actually is flat. He decided to post up on a giant boulder he found on the edge of the earth and build a house to have easy access to the edge for studying, to eventually bring his findings home to those silly round earth scientists, finally proving them wrong. This build was actually inspired by those TikTok ads for crappy iPhone games. Although the games are crap, the AI generated pictures they use to get you to play are pretty cool. In one pic I saw a house that was built on top of boats, so I'll be recreating that in today's build. I'll start by building the houseboat used to sail to the edge of the earth. I'm going to be using these World War II Japanese utility boats. I know they say 1 to 350 scale, which is a bit small, but some would say they're actually average, maybe even above average. And they end up fitting the scale pretty well, so it worked out for the best. I used PVA glue to glue some coffee stirring sticks together, cut a piece out for the floor of the house, then glue the floor to the boats. For this I used hot glue since you can't see it and it dries fast. Smaller boats so there's space for the motor in the back and the driver's seat in the front. Now I'm not gonna lie, I did forget to build the motor, so we'll pretend this dude is just super ripped and paddled all the way out here. Now I'll move on to the walls of the house. For this I used the same coffee stirring sticks I glued together earlier. I cut out a door from the front of the house and windows for the front, back, and sides of the house. After I cut out the windows, I used thin strips that I cut from the same coffee stirring sticks as the glazing bars. Next I'll glue the 4 walls onto the floor and move on to making the roof. I used a cereal box for the roof, then glued the door onto the house and moved on to making the shingles for the roof. The shingles of the roof are really easy to make, they just take a bit of time to build. I'll use the same cardboard from the cereal box. First we will cut the strips out, then make cuts about 3/4 of the way up, all the way down the strip. And lastly, I bent up some of the shingles just to add a little depth to them. After we can glue on each row of shingles with some PVA glue. Before I move on to the next step, I have a quick message from my friend here.
And please subscribe, please subscribe.
Oh yeah, don't forget to like and comment. It really does help out the channel. Thanks y'all. Okay, now that I'm done begging for subscribers, we can move on to the painting of the house. But first I'll tape up the windows just to make the painting easier.
I don't know who it is, but somebody smells like shit.
Well, it's not me. This is just paint, I swear. Now that we've cleared up those allegations, I'll dry brush the brown with a less brown, then dry brush that brown with an almost white brown color to simulate the wood. The roof turned out to be a happy accident because I used an airbrush paint because I like the red color. And remember,
we don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
Since the airbrush paint is so thin, some of the black base coat bled through, which gave a really nice weathered look. To add to that weather look, I used an off-white paint, mixed it with the original red, then I used it to dry brush the roof, giving it a nice edge highlight. Moving on to the boats, I base coated them with a dark gray, then used a chipping medium to help chip off the blue top layer of paint after. To chip off the paint, I used a coffee stirring stick, which did 2 things. It did the initial chipping, and it actually gave it a really nice rust effect. Don't ask me how, but it just happened. And that's the houseboat thingy done. For the next part of the build, I'm going to be working on the boulders the boat is going to be docked to. I'll start by hot gluing these squares of XPS foam together, then use my box cutter to trim them into the rough shapes of the rocks. Then I'll come in and cut out the rock-like texture. When I trim rocks, I do shallow V-cuts in a bunch of random directions. I'll just repeat this step until I get a texture of the rocks that I'm looking for. After that's done, I'm going to coat the rocks with the Mod Podge plaster paint and water mix. The water is used to thin it down a bit. Coat does a few things. It helps seal the foam, hide the lines between the layers, and adds a nice texture. I'll wait for it to dry, then use my pin vise to drill a small hole. This hole is going to be used to hide the wire of the light that I'm going to put in the house. The painting I did is pretty simple. I used a golden brown, a dark gray to highlight areas of the rock, then mix both of those colors together with the tan that I used for the base coat, just to add a bit more variety. To help with the look, I wet blend the paint together so they blend together nicely. When that dries, I dry brush a suede paint all over, then dry brush a pure white from the top down, just to simulate light coming from above. And lastly, I do a heavy layer of black wash. While the black wash is drying, I'm going to work on a platform that's going to sit on top of the largest boulder. This platform will serve a couple purposes. One is going to be for viewing the edge of the earth for studying, and the second is going to be a more permanent housing space for this guy. You might be wondering why I didn't actually build the house up there, and the answer is pretty simple. I was too lazy to build it for now. It's just a giant glorified deck at this point. The platform was built with the same glued together coffee stirring sticks that I used earlier, and I also used balsa strips. To make the balsa strips look older and more worn, I cut pieces randomly off to give that weathered look. I then used it to make the support beams for the platform. After I took it off, painted it with the same technique I used for the rest of the wood in this build, then glued it back onto the boulder. You might remember me saying earlier that I was going to be lighting the house. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. First, I'll cut out a space to hide the battery pack. Then once the space is cut out, I'll feed the light through the hole I cut earlier, then feed the light into the hole I drilled in the bottom of the house. Once I finish violating the house, I use some hot glue to hold the light into place on the house itself. And finally, I just glued the house to the boulder. The reason I docked the houseboat like this is just to help hide the wire. I tucked in the battery and got to work on a way up to get to the top platform. I'll start by making a walkway that wraps around the boulder to the other side. I made the platform with the same glued together coffee stirring sticks and painted it just like I did all the other wood in this build. Then I added supports like I did with the top platform. Unfortunately, I lost some of the footage for the next step, but I'll do my best to explain what I did. I made a spiral staircase, and to do this, I started with a balsa wood strip. I cut up a little bit to weather. I cut small chunks out and glued the small stair-sized coffee stirring sticks in a spiral up the stick. After I cut some stairs in half and glued them onto the ends of the stairs just to act as like a stair rail. Before I pour the resin, I put everything into place just to see if I liked the layout, then hot glued them to hold them in place, and also I was hoping the hot glue would act as like a barrier to hold back the resin from the battery pack. I really didn't want to ruin the pack. Now for my favorite part of resin builds, pouring the resin. I used a deep pour epoxy resin and some alcohol ink. I used a blue ink and a black to give a bit more darkness, then just followed the instructions for the mixing process. After I finished the mix, I laid out some sticks to help less bubbles from forming, which unfortunately didn't work, but I think it's because I mixed it too hard. Once I finished pouring it, I used a torch to pop any surface bubbles. I did this every 10 minutes for about an hour. I like to imagine the edge of the earth has a slow flow of water cascading down the side. So to try and get that effect, I'll use gloss Mod Podge and my airbrush to push the glue around to give a rippling water effect. After it dried, I did the same to the top level of water, then moved on to making a tree that I'm going to put on the biggest boulder. To start, I glued some sticks together to act as the main structure of the tree, then cut these seafoam trees into smaller pieces to glue onto the main structure. When doing this, try to make more realistic looking clumps, and then we'll glue leaves onto them in a bit. Once the branches are glued on, I painted the whole thing a medium brown with my airbrush. If you don't have an airbrush, any brown spray can will work. For the last step of painting, I just dry brush an off-white to bring out the edges. Now I'll glue on the leaves. For the leaves, I used an AK Interactive shrub, specifically the Spring Light Green and the Spring Green. I trimmed off the bottom bit where it's mostly just sticks and got to work gluing the chunks of greenery onto the seafoam pieces. I made sure to mix up the colors so I get a nice variety on the tree. This is a very time-consuming process, but the time you put in is well rewarded with the product that comes out at the end. This is hands down my favorite method for making these trees. The end result really speaks for itself here. After all the greenery is glued on, I'll do a little trimming with some scissors just to get rid of any sticks or random bits that I don't like.
I've been thinking about your love tonight. I've been thinking about your love tonight. Two hearts gonna make our worlds collide, baby. I just wanna be
Thank you so much to everybody who watched the video, and I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.
About your love tonight. Two hearts gonna make our worlds collide, baby. I just wanna be the one to treat you right. Two-step in me, baby, slide, slide. I've been thinking about your love tonight. I just wanna be the one to treat you right. I've been thinking about your love tonight. Two hearts gonna make our worlds collide, baby. I just wanna be the one to treat you right. Two-step in me, baby, slide, slide. Tonight.